in this event tonight, we're going to be visiting an exhibition that opened in the spring of 2018, titled Permanent Temporariness. And it featured a retrospective look at the art installations, essentially, and the work of Alessandro Petti and Sandi, who are with us today. It was co-curated by Salwa Mikdadi and Bana Kattan. So Salwa Mikdadi is on our faculty at NYU Abu Dhabi and also has been working with Alessandro and Sandi for quite a number of years. And Bana Kattan at the time was a curator at the NYU Abu Dhabi Gallery. She is now the associate curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, which I understand you just started the job very recently, if I'm not mistaken. Congratulations. We're very, very excited for your trajectory in that process.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to back up for just a second. I'm assuming most of the audience knows some or all of us, but just to reiterate, I'm Maya Allison. I'm the founding director of the gallery at NYU Abu Dhabi. And Bana and I together actually formed the gallery exhibition program. And so this is a really nice chance to reunite and look back at one of the last exhibitions that she did with us before she moved on. And I'm going to start then by looking at the images of the exhibition, which are now online. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen. And as I do so, I'm going to ask the panelists to talk a little bit about the exhibition. But before I share my screen, I just want to start by welcoming you, Salwa, and Alessandro and Sandi and Bana, and just give you a chance to say hello and check in. Where are you all located now? And what are you doing in the middle of this crazy time that we're in? Salwa, would you like to start? Are you going to need to unmute?
I'm an art historian at the NYU Abu Dhabi. Work with Maya. I'm very happy to be here, reunited in this fantastic idea of a program. So, thank you.
Welcome. And you're in Abu Dhabi now, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And Alessandro and Sandi?
Hi, we are in this moment in Stockholm. Yeah, I mean, it's indeed a very strange moment in time and history, and so we are, and very soon we will be in Italy for a field trip in Sicily in a week time, hopefully for a new project that we are doing. So this is what we will be doing.
Yeah. I'm very glad to be part of this reunion. Thank you, Maya, for organizing that, and very glad to continue these conversations also with Bana and Salwa. It was a wonderful opportunity for us to, from Palestine, reconnect with the Arab world. So looking forward for this discussion.
Good. Welcome. Bana, where are you?
Hi, I'm in Seattle, quarantining. And I definitely am really already enjoying this reunion. So thank you to NYUAD Art Gallery. And I can't wait to start this conversation.
Good. Welcome, everybody. So to the participants, to the audience, I want to let you know that the Q&A box on the lower section of your window where it says Q&A, if you type in there, all the panelists can see what you've posted. Here, congratulations, Bana, thrilled for you. And Bana, does Bana miss us? I think you have a little bit of a fan club over here. Okay, so I'm going to now share the screen and take us back in time. What is it? 2 years to the beginning of 2018. And when I share the screen, you should see what we're calling the archive page for Permanent Temporariness. So in this exhibition page, we have a new image up. It's an image from the installation. This is the tree school. And the way that we've set up our archive pages is that there's a little summary of the exhibition, and then from there you're able to go straight into the essay by the curators, which then leads to a link to either the PDF of the brochure or the texts, or actually the books and the brochures that were part of the exhibition. So I want to play a little bit of this video that kind of walks you through the exhibition to take us back to that moment. And let me know if you have any trouble with the sound. Should be okay. This is a series.
While for many knowledge is mainly based on information and skills, the Tree School places strong emphasis on the process of learning. These experiments wants to be in dialogue with formal education institutions in order to create new spaces for learning. By activating critical and egalitarian
I think I jumped into the middle of the video. So the audio, if I'm not mistaken, Alessandro, this is from the audio guide to the exhibition, is that correct?
Termination of the Haitian refugee camp as UNESCO World Heritage Site. Refugee camps are established with the intention of being demolished. They are not accepted to have a history or a future. They are meant to be forgotten. The history of refugee camps is constantly erased, dismissed by states, humanitarian organizations, international agencies, and even by refugee community themselves, in fear that any acknowledgement of the present undermines their right of return.
So this video takes you through the exhibition, through images of the exhibition, but also the audio guide to the exhibition. And what I want to do is look at the first series of images that we see in the video and ask the curators and the artists to talk about what this work was. This is the first one you encounter as you go into the gallery. One of you would like to pick it up from here, and just let me know if you'd like me to move through the images.
These are images from the refugee heritage. These are light boxes that we decided to use in order to recreate special conditions that for us was very important to reflect on the notion of permanent temporariness. In this case, these are images from the Haitian refugee camps. And as you see, there are images that are taken during the night. Because also most of the time refugee camps, they are in this endless day, and the nights, these night shots reveals some of the aspect that we were very much interested aesthetically, politically, but also architecturally. And that was also combined with a series of other works. So what we believed worked very well and we were very much excited about, it was also how it was connected from what you see now in the background, which is the Common Assembly, which is, of course, speaks to the Refugee Heritage Project, because it's another project that we did in 2011, in which we reflect on the idea, in this case, of a common assembly rather than a parliament. And that is reproduction of one-to-one of the stairs that and the forum that exists today in the parliament that was under construction in Abu Dhabi, and it was never used. So the idea was also to recreate a space for assembly inside the gallery itself, where some of the topics that are linked to the exhibitions can be discussed by the public and the larger community. So the exhibitions for us is also performative in that way. It's also a discursive space. So these are not simply objects to be looked at, but they are objects to be used.
And just to retrace for a moment, for people who weren't able to visit this exhibition, what you're looking at, so there's a series of light boxes with photographs on them from a refugee camp, documenting the camp at night with no people in it. And then next to it is this concrete staircase that stretches across the entire gallery. And it is, if I'm not mistaken, a sort of a slice out of a building that you're referring to as the parliament, right? That's the width of the line that is drawn between Israel and Palestine, correct? Yeah. And so tell us about the photographs and the process of commissioning them and what you were hoping to do with this installation and this moment. And also a little bit about the UNESCO story would be great.
I guess the refugee heritage is one of these projects that comes after a very, very long time working in refugee camps, after almost 10 years of working in refugee camps, where we built relations with communities, where we even tried to do a university in a refugee camp. So our relation actually became so quite connected with the Haitian refugee camp, to a point that, you know, you understand that it has 70 years. I mean, 70 years is quite a long time. And there is a law in Palestine that anything that is beyond 50 years can be considered heritage, right? So in that sense, also it was a moment where there was, you know, where we were seeing a lot of refugees in the world, witnessing a lot of refugees with the war of Syria. And everybody speaks about the experience of refugees as a very temporary experience, as if it matters for what it is, and it matters for the pain that people have, but never as a heritage of humanity, right? What does that mean for humanity? And the question came very strongly, knowing a place like the Haitian, and knowing how strong it exists. The question comes, is there a refugee heritage? Can we speak about refugee heritage? And if yes, how can we do it? Should we bypass UNESCO, or should we still be engaging with, for how much problematic it is to engage with an organization like UNESCO? The question was, should we organize or not? And we decided to make properly our homework and fill exactly the UNESCO file as if it is by real, as if it is happening on real life, and fulfill completely the dossier. And at that moment, we decided also to continue our art project in that sense by inviting Luca Capuano, that was actually commissioned to do the images for the UNESCO heritage sites in Italy. And we asked him to come to Palestine, to the Haitian refugee camp, and do exactly with the same cure, with the same attention to both aesthetics and buildings and architecture, in the same way he did in Italy, to do it in the Haitian refugee camp. And by the way, I mean, working in the camp, of course, you have all the time journalists coming during the day already thinking that they are in a dangerous place, and nobody would ever go to the camp in the night. And what we experienced, both of us, what was happening in the camp when it's empty of journalists, is a complete different thing, is a complete different life. And we encouraged Luca to think how also the night images might be a very important images for this project. And this is actually how it comes to be. Maybe, I mean, it's a long story, but I'm trying to shorten it as much as I can, and then we would continue. I mean, it's a long project and a long story, but I would stop here for now.
Okay. Bana or Salwa, do you want to add anything about the inception of this project in the exhibition as you curated it?
Well, I want to say that, yeah, our collaboration, or my collaboration with Sandi and Alessandro, goes back a long time ago. I was first introduced to their work in the 2003 Venice Biennale Stateless Nation, a commission. They were commissioned by the curator of the Biennale and they did an amazing project. But then later on, when I did get to know them better in 2005, they were also participants in Venice. So we had many meetings in Venice, I guess. And I was drawn very much to their work. And I think it's important to note here that central to their idea, their concept of their work is their architectural intervention and their communal engagement. So if we look at every single one of these installations has an architectural element to it that these artists had brought forth, and we both as curators made sure we could facilitate that. But also at the same time, there is a community engagement in the Haitian Camp project. There is a common assembly, clearly. We're supposed to represent the Palestinians, but there is more to that story. In the Tree project, there is a community they're engaging with. In the Ramallah Syndrome, there is another community engagement. And so is, of course, clearly the Madafa. But so maybe we could talk about how this exhibition presents itself in different locations. But what was drawn to their work also was their empathy and respect for the community they work with. And they work with them on equal footing, knowing full well their conditions and understanding them not from someone working from a distance, but someone like Sandi worked inside, as she said, the refugee camp. But the way this manifested itself on a campus was quite unique for this experience. So I'm sure Bana wants to add more on this.
The only other thing that I would add maybe is just to piggyback on what Salwa was saying and say that in that vein, there are many projects that Sandi and Alessandro have done and will do that we will never see in a museum. And it's almost like the priority is the projects and the community. And if it fits into a museum, then maybe that will be exhibited. But that's very much unlike many of the other, we know a lot of artists that even that we've had at the gallery, like Slavs and Tartars, who think about exhibitions in a very curatorial way. And yes, Alessandro and Sandi do have a very architectural eye, and so they are, Salwa and I have both said many times that they are also the co-curators of this show. We cannot say that we've curated the show by ourselves, Salwa and I. All four of us did it together. And so, but very uniquely, I would say, is that their priority has never been galleries or museums. And that's what really sets them apart.
I think that's a really important point because one of the sort of amazing things about this project was that you and Salwa brought us an exhibition that's an institutional retrospective of work that you wouldn't often see in an institution. So what does it mean to do a retrospective of installations that are kind of responding to a site? So to reinstall these projects is to fundamentally change the meaning of the project because the audience is in dialogue differently than where it was originally installed. I wanted to do a quick walkthrough of just the remainder of the works because the exhibition was not only in the gallery, right? I'm gonna go back one here. So there was this what I think of as the concrete stairs, but it was the dividing line in the gallery. There were a series of videos related to that line. And then in the atrium, and then there was the Ramallah Syndrome, this sort of audio experiential installation, which we can come back to. And then what we call the Tree School, which actually was a place where we held a lot of classes while the exhibition was on. And then beyond that, there also was the concrete tent, which is, so we're leaving the gallery and there are art installations created around the campus. And this is one of them. This is a major piece. It's still standing now, actually. It's permanently, temporarily there. And then in the library, there was a performance by a calligrapher, which I'll let you explain, as well as this piece. This is called Living Room. And I'm going to play just a minute of it because it gives you a feel for how their work really can't be captured by a gallery. And I think this is a really crucial element. Does somebody want to describe what we're about to see here?
Hi, my name is Sandi.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a moment when I arrived to Abu Dhabi for a field work and thinking how can we eventually bring this project to the campus. Maybe it was a bit of a historical moment for us where we left Palestine and we were going to Sweden and via United States. So we stayed 1 year in United States and then Sweden. And definitely in order to make a very long story short, my major question in Sweden was, what happened with me the fourth day? And we all know, I mean, in all languages of the world, there is this proverb that says you are a respected guest for 3 days. And then, you know, in Swedish, for example, they say you smell. In Arabic, they say you become a sadaqah, which is a pettiness. No, I mean, it's like people are have pettiness for you. They help you because they have to help you. You become an aid. a person to be aided rather than a respected guest, right? And my very, very simple question was, what will happen to me in Sweden the fourth day I arrive? Should I accept myself as an eternal guest? Means that I would be in Sweden guest forever and trying to assimilate Swedes as much as I can until I eventually become similar to them and they accept me, or there is other ways of thinking ourselves the fourth day we are in a place. And this is also very much at the center of the title of the exhibition, Permanent Temporariness, because what does it mean? Is it as long as we are temporary and guest people, is it okay that we consider ourselves and we are considered as guests? Or there are other ways of demanding agency? And in that sense, I began a bit to think that what maybe I would be lacking out of our life in Palestine is how we turn our house, and actually our practice is called dar, which means home, how we turned our house into a sort of an institution or quasi-institution. And we opened it and we began to host a discourse in Palestine around decolonizing architecture and art that has not been there in the public. And we decided to departure it from our living room, from our house, right? So in that sense, I feel that what I would be missing the most in Sweden is my right to host, my right to still having my living room, to be able to act in the public, change the public, challenge the public. So, and when I arrived to the campus, definitely, I spent 2 weeks. So it was obvious that also there for me, the question was what I will be doing the fourth day. And I was given this apartment to in the dorms of the teachers in the NYU. And I decided to turn my living room into a public living room in the campus. And I have to say that an immediate sort of reaction to this is that in the first 3 days, I felt myself very strongly guest. The moment I began to host, I began to feel that I'm also knowing people in the streets, because we had so many people coming to the living room, and I was hosting everyone, and it's very easy. Actually, relations is a completely different, dynamics is a completely different. And suddenly I would walk in the campus saying hello to many people. And at this moment, it felt that I am actually in my own way, even if temporary for 2 weeks, can still claim my right to be a host even in the campus in the NYU. And this was actually a performance that maybe we show a video out of it, but definitely the experience itself was not shown in the exhibition. And these are one of these projects where, you know, the dynamics, the way, and now in this moment, there are two permanent temporariness living rooms, one in Boden in north of Sweden, active by refugees living there, and the other one is in the Abbemuseum, acted by rejected asylum seekers. So in that sense, this kind of projects are also very important for us. And yeah, I mean, we deal with questions like sustainability, responsibility, and many other questions that I would not in this moment raise, but definitely if we are creating socially engaged public art outside of the gallery, then questions like future sustainability, engagement with communities becomes, is the artist himself the only responsible for the continuation of these projects, or are institutions, commissioners, participants in the project are equally responsible for these projects? Are questions that in this moment we are dealing with from where we are in Sweden.
May I also, I don't know if there's a time, but would like to also engage with the point that Bana and Salwa made also regarding maybe to this general questions that I think is very important for us, but I guess in this particular moment, why we are doing exhibitions. I think this has been always a very important question, you know, on what kind of role exhibitions play in something that also exists beyond the exhibition experience itself. First of all, the exhibition for us was never the ultimate goal, but was many times a fundamental step. Sometimes is actually the exhibition a sort of pretext that create the conditions and sparkle a project, or maybe is in the process of the project itself, or sometimes, of course, can be also at the end. But we never been interested in thinking about the exhibition as a space of representation of something that is happening in another site. For us, the exhibition has been always a place, it's another site that of course resonates with the site that somehow maybe is dislocated in another place, but also create a specific conditions where we continue to work on the project simply in different ways. So, and that is for me, I think, important to make it clear. First, to take the distance from the idea of an exhibition space as only as a space that hosts objects, and that's why I stressed from the beginning that also then the exhibitions become a performative space. This, what we produce in the exhibitions are also instruments that are used during the exhibition itself in order to bring up discursive elements, and resonate also, as in the case of Abu Dhabi, was very important for us that what we were somehow engaging as a condition of permanent temporariness, very clear in the case of Palestinian refugee camps, but equally important in a place like the Emirates, where the vast majority of the people actually live in a condition of permanent temporariness in a very, of course, different way. And that is, in a sense, why so beautifully the concrete tents also engage with the activity of students and teacher, both at the pedagogical space, but also very much as a space that poetically speak to something that we also find incredibly powerful to share with students and faculties and visitor of the exhibitions, that in a way brought the discourse that was maybe site-specific of Palestine, but in the moment that we create different conditions like the concrete tents in the campus, I think that then became a space that was used in a completely different ways, but retaining this very essence of trying to understand this condition of precarity and fragility that, of course, the majority of the people that live in the Emirates have, that at some point in their life, they are, they cannot think themselves staying, for a long period of time. I mean, at that kind of conditions, how that conditions in a way, it gets solidified into a concrete tent, which is exactly the sort of contradictions between what we consider to be permanent and what we consider to be temporary. Therefore, all these different interventions in a way are all also in Abu Dhabi site-specific interventions, because they had to negotiate, for example, the regulations that were enforced, for example, in the campus. And the discussion that we had, it was that we believe that the way, if we would have presented this project maybe as a permanent, we will never be, possible actually to be realized. But the fact that it was presented also as a temporary with the possibility, to extend its own existence was also a ways for us, to somehow use permanent temporariness, which is usually used by the government in order to control our own existence, but also in that case, reverse the logic and try to create a space that also will be radically different maybe from the other spaces that were planned in a campus that usually architecturally are very well defined. For us, that was the space in which people could actually gather, sitting on the floor, and doing things that were somehow not formally planned as to be in themselves educational. So that is a little bit very important point that was made in the ways in which the exhibitions is simply another site where different things can happen. It's not absolutely as only or at all a place of representations or just producing somehow objects that can be simply commercialized in that sense. So that I guess was a very important point that I wanted just to share.
I agree. I totally agree. And I would love to hear actually, I think that the fact that these works were made responding to a preliminary series of projects, and they continue to grow also after this exhibition, right? So many of these pieces that we saw at NYU Abu Dhabi then went on to the Abbemuseum and have continued to develop over time. I wanted to go back in time a little bit now, and Salwa, to ask you about the first time you encountered Alessandro and Sandi, and to hear a little bit more about the origin story of your relationship to them as a curator and a colleague. If you could take us back and time travel for a minute.
Well, I was fortunate to be part of a conversation, and that's how Sandi and Alessandro like to refer to their discourses, intellectual discourses, as conversations. So, as I said earlier, the respecting individuals, no matter where they are, refugees or architects who enjoy the space, their home, and are in the residency program, which is again a community of architects who come from all over the world, artists as well, to be part of their residency program, which they initiated in their home. And so I became very much interested in this. And when I was planning for the Palestinian representation in the Venice Biennale in 2009, I immediately thought of their work. And so we had a series of conversations. And I did not have a specific theme that I asked them to respond to, but I wanted to listen to them and listen to how and understand better how they're thinking. And then they came up with this proposal for the Ramallah syndrome, which we discussed over and over again. And I think we kept discussing it until the day we installed it, discussing how it should be set up and where, and the lights and the sound and all that, and how it impact. So, and you showed the audience, I think, the image of the Ramallah syndrome, which was commissioned specifically for the 2009, as I said, Palestine Care of Venice exhibition that I curated at that time. And in that sense, that exhibition also brought in another community of people from Palestine to discuss, and it took place in the recording of these conversations again, took place among the community in Ramallah and in different cities. And we don't have time to go over every specifics of this project, but what is important is that it's almost like eavesdropping onto a conversation that's a heated conversation taking place in Ramallah at a specific time in history, which is very important. And this time and space are very important for these kinds of exhibitions that travel, because unlike a painting, and the painting can of course be contextual, respond to the context it's in, but this kind of work, when it moves from one side to the next, has different meanings, as Alessandro mentioned in regard to the life of permanent temporariness in the UAE, but also in regard to what was happening in Venice.
Can we just clarify quickly for those who couldn't see it? This black box that you're looking at is what we're referring to as Ramallah syndrome. And can you describe maybe what happens when you walk inside this room?
Yeah. So this installation is basically a small room, dark, and there is no light inside, maybe just a faint bulb. And when you enter, it's a padded room, so it's sound insulated. And what you hear is a recording of a conversation that is taking place, different conversations in Palestine in regard to the status of Ramallah and the status of Jerusalem. A very timely subject, continues to this day. And what was behind the political concepts behind this was the fact that Ramallah is taking place, becoming slowly the capital of a future Palestine state, in the two-state solution. And at this time, and there is a purposeful political plan to marginalize Jerusalem out of becoming ever a future of a Palestinian state, which is actually what happened now. So there was a heated conversation about people living in Ramallah as a bubble at that time. And along with that, there is a sound installation by Rawan and Basil Abu Rahmi. And that installation, along with the sound and the discourse, it allows you to, it forces you actually to concentrate on the conversation even more, because you can barely hear the conversation. It becomes more intriguing, and as you listen more and more, you forget being claustrophobic in the space, and you want to learn more about what the conversation is about. And on the label for each one of these works, there is a list of the collaborators on these projects, so that, as I said, most of the work is a collaboration. So that's in short about this. I don't know, maybe do you want to add more? I'm sure the artists on this.
Well, I'd also love to hear sort of from, so you came across them initially in a series of conversations and dialogues that you were invited to become a part of, and then that led to you working with them at the Venice Biennial in 2009. And
right.
Then, is that
and
right?
then I followed their work through the residencies, and we met frequently in Palestine. So on my visits there, so we were not disconnected. I mean, I've always was hoping that I could go back and work with them again, because it was a true pleasure working with them in many sense. I've learned a great deal. More about the people they were working with, because they always brought them into the conversation. It wasn't like they went there, they observed the site as a landscape, and then brought out a project, and then it was exhibited. Like Bana said, this is something completely different. And they try to include the audience into their engagement with their communities. Yeah.
And my understanding is that your background in training, Alessandro and Sandi, is in architecture and engineering. Is that right? And I'm wondering if, Bana, if you could talk for a minute about, so you came into this relationship later, but you were very actively involved in the curating and process of this show. If you could talk about what it's like to curate and work with Alessandro and Sandi versus the many other artists that we've had who also do installation. You know, like, do you see sort of a fundamental, do you experience it differently, and how does it shift how you think about what the work is and what you're doing as a curator?
I mean, yes, definitely Alessandro and Sandi are unlike any other artists I've ever worked with. Again, their architectural eye makes them a pleasure to work with, and everything that we exhibit is exhibited in a completely different way than it's been exhibited before. And they are very aware of their different audiences, you know. So when Refugee Heritage showed, I saw it exhibited in Chicago in the Architecture Biennial, in the most recent one, right after I saw it in Abu Dhabi, and it was maybe a year apart, and it was a completely different experience, and it was very unique and matching and suited for this new location that was all windows and light, and completely different than our experience of navigating through what you felt like you were walking through the refugee camp. And so their connection to the audience and their architectural technicality is very unique. But another thing that I would add is that this is their first retrospective exhibition ever, and there were only 9 works in it. And so they are the kinds of artists that can have 1 million retrospective exhibitions. And I think that, you know, this amazing book that was published as well is the true retrospective in a way. And the archive that the gallery is doing now, these are the things that are actually, and actually their website, the DAR website, you know, these are the things that even that you can barely even feel how much they've actually accomplished. And so, yeah, that's all I'll add.
I know that the work on the book started as we were leading up to this exhibition, sort of in parallel, and I was really glad to see it realized when it came out around the same time as the Abbemuseum exhibition, right? Which was the next iteration on the trail. And I'm going to share the screen for a second to just give you guys a glimpse of this book. I wish I wish that I had a copy physically with me to show you, because it's physically a very beautiful book. It's thick and heavy, and it has wonderful little gold edges. And can you see it okay? Oh, good, there it is. Wonderful. And it opens, you know, it opens with these terms that are really important concepts in their work. Borders, the camp, confession, decolonization, exile, heritage, madafa, hospitality, neighboring, I'm not going to try the Arabic, participation, and so on. So it's it sort of rehearses the key ideas in the concepts of their work, but then is a really comprehensive retrospective of the different projects. And they've manifested in many different ways over the years. So our exhibition is really just like a moment, a snapshot in time. In no way is the definitive representation of their work, which I think is a much more truthful way of doing a retrospective in a way, because the meaning of an artwork changes over time, even if you don't change anything, but their artwork itself changes over time, which I think is kind of amazing. So other thoughts about the book? How has that been, about where the work has gone after NYU Abu Dhabi and how it's changed, or new projects that you're working on?
I mean, before I would answer this question, if you permits me, because, you know, I would like a bit to share a memory I had in my mind when the first time with Salwa we were discussing the permanent temporariness in Abu Dhabi. And I remember it was a very hard time for me, I have to say, because we were a bit emptying, not emptying, but trying to order our house, what to keep, what not to keep, because we were moving to Sweden, knowing that, you know, and in here also, sometimes is very important to contextualize why did we move to Sweden, because we lived in Palestine for 10 years and Alessandro has never been able to get any family reunion. He was on a visa, touristic visa for each 3 months to be renewed, and we arrived to a point that it was impossible for us to continue living in Palestine, so we had to leave it. And I remember myself almost, you know, speaking with Salwa, telling her, I don't even know how to live this moment, right? It's so hard. It's an impossibility. What does that mean for us? And she immediately, I mean, I remember we were speaking also about what does it mean to conserve a work like ours? What does it mean to lose Palestine or lose or maybe gain? I don't know. What does it mean to look at Palestine from far away? What does it mean to bring Palestine with us? Well, we will be bringing in our luggages. And Salwa immediately proposed, why don't you come in the NYU for a retrospective exhibition? And I have to say that this was the first time that we even thought about the retrospective exhibition. But at that moment, it made a whole sense, because in that sense, it was really like when you are traveling somewhere, it was our boat into somewhere else, right? It was necessarily to actually understand what we did and what we are going to do, what this passage is all about. How can we move between these both sort of lives? And actually, I have to really credit Salwa's immediate sort of, you know, generous act of saying, why don't you come for a retrospective? I'm sure this will help you. And it did, actually. It clarified so many things. And looking at it, and it was a moment where we were first in the States and then in Sweden, and we were quite vulnerable, not knowing where we go. And this is where the whole concept and idea of reading our practice through the permanent temporariness lens happened. So I guess that it's also still, I'm convinced that it was a real historical moment, this retrospective also in our practice and in understanding how to do it. And we were in the safest place ever, I mean, working. And I have also to admit that few friends were asking us, are you sure you want to be in Saadiyat Island? And we say we are with the people in Saadiyat Island. We are not in Saadiyat. I mean, we trusted so much the whole long collaboration that we knew that we gonna make it. And actually we wanted also to begin from the Arab world, because it would make no sense. It would not be less evil if we are somewhere else in another museum in Europe or in the States, right? So we wanted absolutely to begin to departure from the Arab world and to departure from a place where we feel we trust people. And as Salwa mentioned before, we trust the community. We are part of this community and know that we can be part of this community. So I have to say, you know, this is for me still a very dear moment, me sitting in the bed of our house in Palestine and thinking these moments of me whining to Salwa of what does it mean for us to leave Palestine. So, and I wanted to share it with all of you.
That's really lovely. And, you know, I felt like one of the social media responses from the community sort of speaks back to you. And it was somebody who was getting ready to move away from Abu Dhabi, having lived here for a good portion of their lives. And they went to see this exhibition and were very moved and emotional in response to it because they felt that it spoke to them as having built a life in a place they knew would be temporary. And that this exhibition spoke directly to them, independent of the political context, right? It's just this fundamental human experience of feeling home or not home, safe or not safe, steady and stable and versus temporary. And that they're very subtle undercurrents, but I think a lot of our audiences responded. And I was really glad that you took this perspective on the project as living within a campus, and universities are by definition transient communities, right? Because we have rotations of 4 years of students coming through, and even more so, and also of course with faculty and adjunct. And so it was really this beautiful resonance between your project and what NYU Abu Dhabi is doing, and then that underlying, the thread of also the Arab world and the Palestinian history as well, I think all kind of brought it together in a way that I don't know that I don't know that it would have meant the same thing to me if I had seen it somewhere else as it did here. So I think I'm really glad that that happened. Thank you, Salwa, for inviting them, and for Bana to Bana.
Can I add just one point here in this regard is that this idea of the title, the permanent temporariness, also is inspired by the Dahishya camp, Palestinian refugee camp, and the life of impermanence. And when the exhibition opened, there were 70 million people who were forced to flee their homes. And that is barely 2 years ago. And now there is almost 18 million refugees around the world who are living these very short, in many ways, impermanence lives. And just to imagine that many people have no homes and they're stateless. So they're becoming truly a stateless nation in that respect. So we want to keep reminding ourselves that this is not something in the past, but it's a present, and we are suffering from it. So just acknowledging that fact.
Thank you. That's really important. So I want to remind the audience, we have about 5 minutes left, 7 minutes left. If you have questions, the panelists are ready to answer them, and we can take questions if people want to type them into the Q&A box below. Not quite ideal, but it's a start if you have some. And otherwise, I'd love to hear other thoughts and reflections. Bana, it looked like you were about to say something as well.
I think Alessandro was. I will follow him.
No, maybe, just to give the time for the participants, to think about their questions, and we're very much looking forward to actually open the discussions. This is also the ways in which we like to think, together with others. But I don't know if it is appropriate, but I was to use this maybe to ask a question to the three of you in some ways, because there is somehow an aspect in our work that has been, until now, we have not in some ways theorized or fully acknowledged. And therefore, I'm not sure, what kind of words I'm gonna use, to try to deal with it. And this is where I would like to maybe to ask you to help to better understand, which is close to what can be called also maybe a feminist practice in some ways, or there are some aspects that deals with maybe generosity, care, being able to work, beyond the ego that's most of the time are mainly also belonging to the specific male role, because of course we all play a role and we all have female and male part in each one of us. But I think you are three incredibly, powerful women, and I've been lucky to live also with another one. And I want just to ask you if you can help me to understand, maybe also in your different individual trajectory, and also with different generations, different continents, maybe for definitely for Bana and Salwa, in the Arab world, in different parts of the Arab world and different parts of moment. Maybe Maya more from the States, but now living also in the Arab world. If you maybe, let's see how I can formulate these questions. Would you think that in which way maybe your also practice engage in some aspects that can be in some ways, I don't know how to call it, but deals also with maybe with a specific approach that might be improperly called, feminist or female, or something that maybe you can help me to clarify, and how that maybe it is linked or not into some of our projects, because we have been for many years, more than a decade, so we're getting old, working mainly with women that have that courage, to enter in these processes that are very risky, in several ways, and not everyone, is actually up to that. And it's a little bit something was in my mind, and I said, apologize if it just was not planned as one of the questions, but I just thought it's such a good occasion for me just to ask you for help to a little bit understand if there are specific aspects maybe in our work that resonate to some of your experience, also as a women curator, in the art world, and what that it means.
Well, I didn't expect a question like that, and it would deserve more time to think about it. But I agree with you, Arab women are formidable, and it is, you have to get to know them, to know the force, the force to reckon with, for sure. But generally, you will find more women working in the cultural field than in like other professions. But unfortunately, we don't see them maybe always like you do. You've been working on one-to-one with many of them, but others, they don't reach the higher levels of status, such as directors of museums, and we're still far from having equity at that level. But at the hands-on is where you find the woman making a change. And that's, I always refer to one exhibit I curated once called Forces of Change, and it was about women artists of the Arab world. And I meant that, every word of that. Because throughout my experience, travels meeting with these women artists, I realized how much they have created a change within their community because they are practical and hands-on, and they get engaged with their projects. So I can't say the men are not at the same time, but there definitely was a very apparent characteristic of these women that I met. I want to hear from Bana here, what she has to say about, is it true? Do you agree?
I agree with Salwa 99.999% of the time. For me, this panel is especially special because it has Maya and Salwa on it. I can honestly and wholeheartedly say that I learned almost everything I know from Salwa. Like working as her researcher for 2 years, and this is now 8 years ago, is basically what all of my knowledge is based off of in the art world. And working with Maya is the launch of my career and my confidence as a curator. And so if only I can stress the strength of these two women and the mentorship of them, then I think that will speak enough. But being in the United States at this time, with watching the Black Lives Matter movement happening here and around the world, I can't help but think about, this is a bit of a transition, but the way that Alessandro and Sandi talk about decolonization from a place of migration, and that to me, as a feminist or as a woman working in the art field, it meant a lot to me to think about the world as a place that is not the global South and the global North, but a place where every person, regardless of their gender, has a power to decolonize. And I think it connects to, when you think about decolonization in terms of the body, and maybe not in terms of gender, I think, or not in terms of decolonization in terms of geography. That is what Alessandro and Sandi taught me, is that when you link decolonization to the body, that is the power of the person.
That's an incredible response, Bana, honestly. I think that the learning to think differently about our fundamental experience of our lives and of our bodies and of our identities also is an interesting factor that you're sort of raising in a way. And I'm not gonna go, I think the two of you have answered the question, but I will say that the first time when I was a little baby curator and I went to the curatorial team meeting at a museum, the first museum I worked at, and I looked around the room and realized that it was mostly women, and there was no question of that authority, period, full stop. And I kind of forget that this is actually not the norm in a lot of places. I think it's a wonderful thing to work with people in an environment where where that mutual respect is assumed. And it may be that that we're drawn to projects where that questioning and that respect is already kind of integrated into the work and therefore into the relationship between the curator and the artist. But I'm not going to speak for all women curators because I know that is down that path lies misery. So there is somebody who would like to know what you guys are doing next. Thank you for this wonderful discussion. A question for Alessandro and Sandi. This was such a sensitive and inspiring exhibition. Can you give us insight into your upcoming projects? Do you see future collaborations with the UAE?
Well, I mean, many questions in one question. I would try very quickly to answer. There are 3 of the projects coming out of the Permanent Temporariness retrospective that are having very strongly an afterlife of the exhibition, which is the Tree School, Refugee Heritage, and the Madafa, the living room. And the 3 of them in 3 different ways deals with hospitality, use of public spaces, of course, how we are represented in public space, how we are agent in public space. The second is that, do we have refugee as temporary people eventually? And the third one is that what kind of knowledge is needed today? And we feel really in each one of these projects, there are steps. So I would very quickly say, for example, the Tree School now is moving to Hong Kong with this idea of creating a curriculum for the school, because our teacher in Hong Kong can choose their own curriculum, and they wanted to adapt eventually with the Asian Art Archive. They would like to create a moment where the tree school is not activated inside an art exhibition, but it is created and activated by a schools teacher everywhere in Hong Kong. So this is one of the next steps we are doing for the tree school. The refugee heritage actually is moving ahead in a very interesting way, where we are still bringing this notion of heritage, but in this moment between Asmara and south of Italy. So Asmara and Sicily, and Asmara has been nominated as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO, and now we are thinking how, I mean, it's a long, I don't know if I can compromise it, but it's definitely one of the major projects, how I can show you how refugee heritage projects can move outside also of Palestine. The moment, you know, Asmara was nominated as the modern architecture in Africa, right? And without really forgetting that this modern architecture came with the process of colonization, right? So this idea of bringing modern and colonial together, I mean, the demodernization and the decolonization as one thing, and say, what does that mean? I mean, how people are reappropriating of such a city, which Asmara is an amazing city, and it was built in the same moment that the fascists built other villages in Sicily. The villages in Sicily are abandoned, but as the case of the refugee heritage, there is something called serial nomination in UNESCO, and Asmara can eventually nominate these villages in Sicily as part of its heritage. So we are really rethinking the whole idea of who is nominating whom, who is the right of nominating that heritage and that culture, etc., etc. And we would like actually a city in Africa, because it is alive, because it's proof how it's possible to reappropriate this modern architecture to include the abandoned villages in Sicily as part of its heritage, because it happened in the same historical moment. And by UNESCO, you can claim, if it happens with same history, same historical moment, you can claim them together. So we are in this moment where, let's put it this way, we are launching an entity of decolonization in Italy and proposing this project as its first practical mission. Let's put it this way. So this is a bit the refugee heritage. And of course, the refugee heritage is also, as it will be presented in Venice Biennale, the Dihetia refugee heritage now. It will be presented in Venice Biennale with a complete big sort of, project. And then the third is the Madafa. The Madafa is actually in the process of being acquired by the Abbemuseum as a way of sustaining it. And in that sense, you know, it will be as a sort of a permanent temporariness. That is a whole chapter that I can speak about for half an hour. How this acquisition is turned to be into a process of collectivity rather than an individual artistic sort of authorship. And it's continuing in Buden with and concentrating on these two examples, one inside the museum and one outside the museum. And as I mentioned before, questioning the responsibility of each one of the actors that has been involved in this project, and how can we deal with it. So these are, I mean, I did not mention everything, but we are completely excited about how, you know, maybe it's a great way also to end, because it's really this permanent temporariness moved us from being one place and understanding that we can still be operating in a very meaningful way, bringing Palestine together with us. Something that I have to say that we were not fully sure that it can ever happen, but definitely in this exciting moment of the practice acting with other places like south of Italy, showing internal colonization inside Europe, what does that mean, etc., etc., and all this relation between demodernization and decolonization are becoming clearer and clearer for us to be in a place like Sweden, where modernity has been really the project, right? And understand how there is a need of speaking about demodernization, not only decolonization, in order to include other cultures that needs to rethink their their acts in a complete different way. So I guess that we are again into a very urgent moment of history, and definitely these three projects would stay with us for quite a few years.
Demodernization. I always feel like there's more that I need to learn about your work. It just keeps growing. It's wonderful. I want to close with a quote from when we were sort of doing the tech rehearsal, and Alessandro said something about how the exhibition creates a space to make possible what would be an impossibility in the real world. It's a space of experimentation. And I want to thank you for allowing our space to become that for you and for our audiences. And I want to thank Salwa and Bana for the incredible trust and work that went into making this happen. It really, it was an incredible journey, and I felt like an impossible space was in fact created on almost every level. And I'm just really, really honored that we all got to work together. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A good night, and thank you everybody who was in our audience as well. And any questions you have that didn't get answered, feel free to just email them to the gallery and we'll forward them and send you back responses.